talk about marketing and ethics and consumerism, we're joined by Bill Anderson, Head of Social and Environmental Affairs for Asia Pacific at Adidas, the Adidas Group, and by INSEAD Professor Craig Smith. Now, Craig, you've brought out a few papers recently about marketing, the stakeholder marketing, an article called The Sweatshop on Your Conscience. This is essentially looking at how marketers should be dealing with consumers and pitching goods.
The idea here is that the decisions made at the bottom of the supply chain by marketers and ultimately by consumers are having an effect upstream on the people that produce the products they're buying and on the environmental conditions under which those products are produced.
Essentially, we're seeing a lot of outsourcing to China and to Asia. Companies wanting the cheapest possible production, and yet the margins.
Companies are looking to source their products at the lowest possible price, to have flexibility and speed in the procurement and the supply of those products. And that's a good thing for consumers in terms of choice, in terms of the price that they pay, but there may also be a price paid by the people at the other end of the supply chain, the folk upstream who are making those products and perhaps having to make changes in the product that they're making at very short notice, which can entail additional work, overtime, and we know that is often associated with in the worst cases, sweatshop labor conditions.
Well, to bring Bill into the conversation here, you are Head of Social and Environmental Affairs. Now, when I heard you speak at Forum here recently, you were saying how you represent something like 700,000 workers across Asia.
Yes, I mean, we have a very large sourcing base. We have over 1,000 suppliers around the region. China, of course, is less than 50%, but still a large part of our supply chain. Although that is changing, there is a significant shift in the sourcing arrangements. Partly that's because of the economic drivers that have pushed up wages, but also labor shortages that are widely reported now. So let's say the perfect storm is happening with commodity prices resurging and higher structural wage changes in the market. So China, although it still predominates in the kind of global sourcing models, you've seen in the apparel industry particularly, but also in footwear industries, a shift out of China. Partly that's driven also by trade restrictions or imposition of trade restrictions by the EU and America as well. So there is a shift happening within Asia, although China still remains a very dominant player.
So what sort of compliance programs do you have? What sort of checks and balances are there to make sure that workers are not being exploited by the factories themselves?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd be very plain in saying there are sweatshops in Asia. There's absolutely sweatshop conditions in Asia, but what we've done over the past 10 years through our program at least is where we have our direct relationships through our monitoring programs, and I have 40 staff that work with me, speak the local language, have the local knowledge. They have worked incredibly hard over this last decade to make sure at least our top tier suppliers are producing. But I think, as covered in the article that you quoted, that and I think is examined as you go further down the supply chain, when you look at the componentry that go with these products, that's where the real challenge lies, because it's very diverse, very expansive. We're talking of tens of thousands of suppliers producing the smaller components, and that's the thing that the industry is particularly challenged by.
Craig, you're looking at stakeholder marketing, and you're making the argument that essentially marketing has focused too much on the consumer.
Historically, marketing has been beating the drum of focusing on the consumer. What we're saying is, well, maybe we've focused too much on the consumer to the exclusion of other stakeholders. And today, with the requirement for companies to give much more attention to their various stakeholders. They can't do that. And marketers themselves need to start engaging more with different stakeholders. Now, they may be the people who are in the supply chain, and this could be stakeholder engagement at the level of the unions, the people representing the employees who are part of these factories.
I think generally the stakeholder engagement process, we're very supportive of. We don't generally do that through our marketing department, though. A lot of our work is directly as a specialist division within the company, and we take on board a lot of what we get back from stakeholders, including workers. We do a lot of direct engagement with workers. We have run worker hotlines and grievance processes and things like that to hear their voice in the suppliers. But of course, I'm talking of 40 staff and 700,000 workers. So even the scale of trying to act if we're not acting as representatives of the worker interests. There are NGOs and trade unions that do that, but we're very much of a belief that if we protect their interests, we are protecting the company's interests, the brand, reputational issues that come up.
Are sweatshops always going to be with us then? I mean, you mentioned that yes, there are sweatshops in Asia, but there are sweatshops in the West, in London and New York and so on. So are they always going to be with us, or is this something that we can eradicate or at least minimize?
I believe they're still going to be there, just simply the scale of the supply chain makes it next to impossible to eliminate sweatshop conditions. But I think for the better companies, I think there's often the distinction between the no-name brands, because the visibility of certain brands demand they do certain things, the Gaps, the Adidases, the Nikes.
And your shareholders are also wanting you to do something, so they're putting pressure on you.
Yeah, it's also the visibility of the brands is it's a lightning rod for attention, so the bigger brands take it very seriously because they are often the ones that are the focus of some of the campaigns and other activities.
One of the things we've seen, over the last decade or so is increased awareness of what's going on up the supply chain, primarily through internet and the related technologies. And it's that increased awareness, that increased knowledge through technology that I think will put the sweatshop on more consumers' conscience than it has been in the past.
But it seems as though regulation is going to be at the heart of this, and legal requirements.
Yes, I mean, if you look really why brands are involved in these activities is in the Asia context at least, is because of the enforcement gap. And the sweatshops that exist in other countries exist because they are in the kind of grey zone of lack of inspectorates and attention. So very much the regulatory enforcement, the institutional systems are the things that are weak, and therefore as a result you see businesses fill a gap in that environment. So, but you are seeing change. China, for example, on a labor rights position, has over the I've worked in China for 20 years, but over the past 10 years certainly has moved markedly to being much more strongly enforced. And you're seeing this overall empowerment of the workforce that has its negative connotations in terms of social stability, social unrest, but actually you're seeing government support. So I mean, some places are changing, and China obviously represents a big part of the supply chain.
There's every indication that we're going to have more consumer concern about these issues, which until the regulation and the enforcement of regulation gets stronger, means that for the big brands at least, they need to give this their attention.
INSEAD Professor Craig Smith and Bill Anderson of Adidas, thanks for joining us.